Berry Gordy built the most powerful black-owned music empire in American history. And then, one by one, the artists and architects who built it walked out the door, and the labels that caught them used their talent to outcompete the very machine that made them. Tonight, 12 stories, 12 artists, 12 rival labels, and the songs that proved Motown couldn't hold on to what it had. Number 12, Freda Payne, Invictus, 1970. Let's start with the most dramatic origin story. In 1967, the three men most responsible for the Motown sound walked out: Brian Holland, Lamont Dozier, and Eddie Holland, the songwriting and production team behind Stop in the Name of Love, Reach Out I'll Be There, Baby Love, Heat Wave, and 25 other top 10 pop hits, left Motown over a royalty dispute. Berry Gordy, furious at the departure, sued them for breach of contract and had them legally barred from writing or producing songs for any other record company. So Holland-Dozier-Holland spent 2 years under legal injunction, building their own rival labels, Invictus and Hot Wax Records, right there in Detroit, waiting for the court to clear them. When the injunction finally lifted in 1970, they were ready, and their first major act of post-Motown defiance was bringing a 30-year-old singer named Freda Payne into the studio to record a song she initially hated. Payne told them the material wasn't right for her age. Producer Ron Dunbar reportedly said, "You don't have to like it, just sing it." He dubbed the track 25 to 30 times to get enough usable parts to edit together. And Holland-Dozier-Holland were so worried about Gordy's lawyers that they had to credit the song under a pseudonym, Edith Wayne, because their own names were still too legally dangerous to put on a record. Band of Gold hit number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the UK charts. It went gold. The background vocalists on the track included Joyce Vincent Wilson and Thelma Hopkins, 2 women who would go on to form Tony Orlando and Dawn. And the electric sitar part was played by Dennis Coffey. The lead guitar was played by a young session musician named Ray Parker Jr., who was barely out of his teens. The song that launched Holland-Dozier-Holland's rival empire, the one built to compete directly with the label they'd spent a decade making great, was so legally fraught they couldn't even put their own names on it, and it still hit the top 5. Number 11, the Isley Brothers, Teena, 1969. The Isley Brothers had been through it all before Motown. A string of labels, some hits, some misses, a brief moment of genuine chart success with Shout in 1959. By 1965, they were on Motown's Tamla imprint, where they scored one meaningful hit, This Old Heart of Mine, written by Holland-Dozier-Holland. And then, as HDH's influence at the label began to wane, the Isley Brothers' chart fortunes waned with it. By December 1968, they were done. They asked for and received their release from Motown, and they went back to something they'd started years earlier, Teena Records, their own label, named after the New Jersey town where they lived. No corporate infrastructure, no quality control committee, no Berry Gordy deciding what was suitable. We'll take it back to 19. Ronald Isley came up with the song in his head while driving his daughter to school one morning. He hummed the entire thing the whole way home so he wouldn't lose it. Got inside, got his brothers, wrote the lyrics together, and recorded the whole track in exactly 2 takes, with a 16-year-old Ernie Isley playing bass for the very first time on record. It's Your Thing was released in February 1969. It shot to number 2 on the pop charts and number 1 on the R&B charts, selling over 1.75 million copies. And then Motown sued them, claiming the song had been recorded while the Isleys were still under contract, which would have meant Motown owned it. The case dragged through federal court for years. The Isleys' own mother accidentally threw out a tape from their basement that might have settled the timeline question one way or the other. The judge ruled in the Isley Brothers' favor. It's Your Thing belonged to them. And the song itself, a funk anthem explicitly about doing whatever you want without anyone telling you otherwise, was recorded in the immediate aftermath of walking away from a label that had done exactly that. You can't write that kind of irony. It just happens. Number 10. The Spinners. Atlantic, 1972. The Spinners spent nearly a decade at Motown being treated like an afterthought. They were placed on the label's secondary VIP imprint, given inconsistent material, inconsistent promotion, and inconsistent priority. Stevie Wonder finally took pity on them and produced It's a Shame in 1970, which cracked the top 15 on the pop charts. But even that wasn't enough to move them up the priority list inside Hitsville. Their contract was running out, and here is where Aretha Franklin changed everything. The Queen of Soul, already enormously successful at Atlantic Records, told the Spinners directly, "Come to Atlantic with me." So they did, in 1972. Atlantic paired them with producer Tom Bell, the architect of what was becoming the Philadelphia soul sound. And on their first session at Sigma Sound Studios in Philadelphia, Bell handed them a song he'd written with Phil Hurt called I'll Be Around. It was planned as the B-side. The intended A-side was a different song entirely. But radio DJs flipped the record over, fell in love with I'll Be Around, and Atlantic had no choice but to repress it as the official single. It hit number 1 on the R&B charts and number 3 on the pop charts, the Spinners' first million-selling single after a decade of being treated as Motown's lowest priority act. And it kicked off a run of hit records with Tom Bell throughout the entire decade that put them among the most consistent soul-charting acts of the 1970s. 9 years at Motown, 1 flipped record at a rival label. That is the Spinners' story. Number 9. Gladys Knight and the Pips, Buddah, 1973. Gladys Knight later wrote in her autobiography that the Pips were treated at Motown like they were picking up other acts' leftovers. Diana Ross and the Supremes, the Temptations, Marvin Gaye, they got the best songwriters, the promotional push, the spotlight. Gladys Knight and the Pips got whatever was left.
He said he's going. He said he's going.
She even told a story about a 1968 tour where Diana Ross had the Pips removed as the Supremes' opening act because they were too good, upstaging the headliner.
The world he left behind.
By 1973, the group had had enough. They signed with Buddah Records, partly because Motown's shift of operations from Detroit to Los Angeles felt like it was tearing apart the creative relationships that had worked. And almost immediately, a songwriter named Jim Weatherly handed them a batch of songs. One was originally titled Midnight Plane to Houston. Gladys didn't love it. Too country, too specific. So the song was reworked. The plane became a train. The destination became Georgia. Her actual home state. Midnight Train to Georgia became the Pips' only #1 pop hit in American chart history. It stayed at #1 for 2 weeks, topped the R&B chart as well, and won the Grammy for Best R&B Performance by a Duo, or group with vocals in 1974.
Ooh, that's someday.
Motown had them for 7 years and never gave them a song anywhere near that magnitude. Buddah gave them one within their first year. There is a specific kind of justice in a group that was treated as second string, finding their biggest moment, the moment they walked away. Midnight Train to Georgia. Is that justice? In 3 minutes and 30 seconds of soul music. Listen, 90% of you watching these videos right now ain't subscribed yet. If these stories are blowing your mind, imagine what you're missing. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and join the R&B fans who never miss a Groove Lens upload. Number 8. Eddie Kendricks, Tamla, Motown, 1973. Now here is the twist in the story. Eddie Kendricks didn't leave Motown to go to a rival label. He left the Temptations, the group he co-founded, and signed a solo deal with Motown's own Tamla imprint. But the rival angle here is internal, and it is absolutely vicious. When Kendricks left the Temptations in 1971, after a final confrontation at the Copacabana in New York, Norman Whitfield, still the Temptations' chief producer, wrote a song explicitly mocking him. Superstar, Remember How You Got Where You Are, was a documented jab, a warning to the man who had the audacity to walk away from the greatest R&B vocal group in the world. Kendricks spent 2 years at Tamla, with his solo career going nowhere. Meanwhile, the Temptations kept putting out hits. Then, in 1973, everything changed. A recording session produced a track built on an early proto-disco groove with Kendrick's impossibly high falsetto riding over it. Keep On Truckin' hit number 1 on both the Billboard Hot 100 and the R&B charts simultaneously, went gold, and sold an estimated 3 million copies. Stereogum's number 1 series later called it arguably the first disco record ever to hit number 1. And buried in the lyrics was Kendrick's own return jab at his former bandmates, a lyric referencing the old Temptations' reign he was ducking, as he kept on trucking through it. He followed it immediately with Boogie Down, which hit number 2 pop and number 1 R&B, then ran off 9 consecutive R&B top 10 singles. The man the Temptations told to remember how he got where he was, went on to redefine where soul music was going. That's the rival story happening inside Motown's own building. Number 7. The Four Tops, ABC Dunhill, 1973. When Motown announced in 1972 that it was moving all operations from Detroit to Los Angeles, the Four Tops made a decision. They were Detroit. They were not going to Los Angeles. So they left the label they'd called home since 1963 and signed with ABC Dunhill, a label that saw exactly what it was getting and immediately paired them with songwriters Dennis Lambert and Brian Potter, who set about building the Four Tops a new sound that was smoother and more lush than the Funk Brothers-backed records they'd made at Hitsville, but still undeniably built on Levi Stubbs' gospel-trained baritone voice. The result was Ain't No Woman Like the One I've Got, released in January 1973. It peaked at number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 2 on the R&B chart, and number 1 on the Cashbox Pop chart. It went gold. And it was the Four Tops' highest charting pop single since Bernadette in 1967, meaning that after 5 years of declining results with Motown following the departure of Holland-Dozier-Holland, one album at a rival label gave them back their top 5 pop status. Duke Fakir later described in his memoir how Motown executive Ewart Abner told them they were being let go. He said, "I was so mad and hurt, not just about what he said, but the way he said it. so matter-of-fact, cold, like he was throwing out the trash. That is the quote. The Four Tops stayed together for another 30 years. That is the answer. Number 6. Honeycomb, Hot Wax, 1971. Holland-Dozier-Holland didn't just build one rival label after leaving Motown, they built two. Invictus and Hot Wax Records operated as sister companies out of Detroit, both designed to compete directly with the label whose sound HDH had spent a decade creating. While Freda Payne was the flagship act on Invictus, Hot Wax had a group called Honeycomb, 3 women, Carolyn Willis, Edna Wright, and Shelley Clark, each of whom had backgrounds as session singers and backup vocalists for some of the biggest acts in the business. Want Ads was written by Greg Perry, General Johnson, and Barney Perkins, and produced by the Holland-Dozier-Holland team under their post-injunction production style, a sound that drew directly on the Motown playbook, but with a slightly funkier, more independent edge. The song is about a woman placing a classified ad for a new lover, treating the search for a relationship like a job listing. It is pointed, witty, and completely irresistible. Want Ads hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in May 1971, making it the first number 1 pop hit for Holland-Dozier-Holland since they had left Motown 4 years earlier. The specific fact that their first post-Motown number 1 came not from Invictus, the label named after the word for unconquered, but from the sister label Hot Wax, with a group most pop listeners had never heard of, says something about the extraordinary depth of the HDH creative machine. They left Motown because Gordy wouldn't pay them what they were worth. Then they went and had a number 1 pop hit on their own label, with their own artists, on their own terms, and they got every single dollar of it. Number 5. The Jacksons, Epic, 1976. The Jackson 5 signed with Motown in 1969 and immediately became the label's biggest new phenomenon in years. 4 consecutive number 1 singles straight out of the gate. But by the mid-1970s, the brothers wanted something Motown had never fully given any of its artists: the ability to write and produce their own material. In 1975, they left for Epic Records. Motown, furious at the departure, refused to relinquish the name Jackson 5. They owned the trademark, so the brothers rebranded as simply the Jacksons. Jermaine, who was married to Berry Gordy's daughter, stayed behind. Younger brother Randy stepped in. Epic gave the group something Motown never had: full creative participation. Their 1976 debut on the label The Jacksons, produced by Gamble and Huff of Philadelphia International, opened with Enjoy Yourself, a sleek, disco-influenced funk track that reached number 6 on the pop charts and number 2 on the R&B charts, marking their first pop top 10 hit in 3 years. But Enjoy Yourself is almost beside the point. The real story of what happened when the Jacksons left Motown for Epic plays out over the next decade. Michael Jackson, now a solo artist on the same Epic label, released Off the Wall in 1979. Then Thriller in 1982, which became, and remains, the best-selling album of all time. Every single thing that made Michael Jackson the biggest artist in music history happened after Motown. Epic didn't just catch a former Motown act, they caught the king of pop. Number 4. Marvin Gaye, CBS Columbia, 1982. By 1981, Marvin Gaye was a tax exile in Europe, owing millions to the IRS and to his ex-wife Anna Gordy, living in a small apartment in Ostend, Belgium, provided by a local music promoter named Freda Coussart, who had taken him in and stabilized his life at one of its lowest points. He had been on Motown for over 2 decades. He had fought Berry Gordy, who was also his former brother-in-law, for creative control, gone on strike, been given the greatest contract in Motown history after What's Going On, and then watched his personal life disintegrate anyway. CBS Records Urban Division President Larkin Arnold came to Europe and convinced Gaye to sign with CBS. On March 23, 1982, Motown and CBS negotiated Gaye's release from his contract. Reports indicate CBS paid somewhere in the region of $1.5 million to buy him out. Gaye went to work in a studio in Belgium and then Germany, and in that exile recorded Sexual Healing, one of the most commercially and critically successful records of his entire career. The song was released in November 1982. It topped the Billboard R&B chart for 10 consecutive weeks, the longest run at the top of the R&B chart in that chart's history up to that point. It crossed over to number 3 on the pop charts, and it won Gaye his first Grammy Awards, 2 of them, Best R&B Vocal Performance, Male and Best R&B Song. After 21 years at Motown, with landmark albums like What's Going On and Let's Get It On his resume, the first Grammys of Marvin Gaye's life came at another label, recorded in a foreign country while he was living in someone else's apartment. He died less than 2 years later, but he went out with his first Grammy in his hand. That belongs in the record. Number 3. Diana Ross, RCA, 1981. Diana Ross had been the crown jewel of Motown for over 20 years. She had arrived as the lead voice of the Supremes, the group that made Motown the biggest black-owned label in American music history, and her solo career had given the label 6 of its most commercially powerful years. Berry Gordy had built his empire in large part around her, and then she left. At the end of 1980, Ross received her exit settlement from Motown, $250,000, for 20 years of stardom, $250,000. Meanwhile, RCA Records came to her with a 7-year recording contract worth $20 million, which gave her complete production control over her own albums. She reportedly asked Berry Gordy directly if he could match RCA's offer. He said it was impossible. She signed with RCA on May 18, 1981. At the time, it was the most expensive recording deal in the history of the music industry. Her first RCA album, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, named after her cover of the Frankie Lyman classic, sold over 1 million copies and gave her a top 10 pop hit with the title track as well as the rock-flavored Mirror Mirror. 2 years later, she wrote and recorded Missing You, a tribute to Marvin Gaye, who had been killed, and it climbed to number 10 on the pop charts, becoming one of the most emotionally resonant records of her entire solo career. 20 years at Motown, a $250,000 goodbye, and a $20 million deal waiting on the other side of the door. Number 2. Teena Marie, Epic, 1984. Here is the Motown departure that changed music industry law permanently for every artist who came after her. Mary Christine Brockert, Teena Marie, had signed with Motown in 1976. She was the most successful white artist in Motown's history, the first white female guest ever invited onto Soul Train, a Grammy nominee, and a genuinely gifted songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and producer who had increasingly taken control of her own recordings. By 1982, she was in a heated legal battle with the label over her contract, specifically over Motown's practice of holding artists to their contracts without actually releasing any music, effectively keeping them trapped in a deal while preventing them from recording for anyone else. Teena Marie won. The court ruling she secured became known in music industry circles as the Brockert Initiative, a legal precedent establishing that a record label could not hold an artist under contract without meeting its end of the deal by actually releasing their music. It was a landmark victory not just for Teena Marie, but for artists' rights across the entire industry. She settled out of court with Motown for unpaid royalties and took her talent to Epic Records. And at Epic, she wrote, produced, and recorded Lovergirl entirely herself, as she did with most of her material. It hit number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1985, her highest pop chart peak ever, and number 1 on the R&B chart. Her biggest song, her biggest hit, her first top 5 pop record, all of it came after the lawsuit, after the legal battle, after Motown let her go. The court filing that changed music law paid off in the recording booth too. Number 1. Holland-Dozier-Holland. Between 1963 and 1967, Holland-Dozier-Holland wrote and produced 25 top 10 pop hits for Motown. Their catalog includes the most commercially successful recordings in the label's history, 12 of the Supreme's chart toppers. The 4 tops, Reach Out, I'll Be There, and I Can't Help Myself, Martha and the Vandellas' Heat Wave, Marvin Gaye's How Sweet It Is. They left because Berry Gordy wouldn't share the profits proportional to what they'd built. Gordy sued them. They were legally barred from using their own names. They built 2 rival labels from scratch in the same city with a skeleton crew. They used the Funk Brothers, Motown's own house band, to play on their records because the musicians supported them, not Gordy. They used Motown's own background singers. They hired Motown's own session guitarists. Between 1970 and 1973, their Invictus and Hot Wax labels produced multiple top 5 pop hits, 2 number 1s, and a string of gold records, competing directly from across the street with the label they had spent a decade making the most powerful soul music operation in American history. Berry Gordy ended up inducting them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1990. He was there at the ceremony. He gave a speech. The same man who had sued them, barred them from using their own names, and called them his greatest professional loss, stood up and told the world they were legends. Because they were. Because they built what he built and then left and built it again. And the rival labels they founded, the acts they signed, and the hits they produced, all of it proved that the sound people called the Motown sound was at least as much Holland-Dozier-Holland's sound as it was Berry Gordy's. 12 artists, 12 labels, 12 songs that proved the talent Motown couldn't hold on to was still talent, just pointed somewhere else now. Berry Gordy built something remarkable, but the artists and architects who walked away proved, record by record, that greatness isn't a building on West Grand Boulevard. It follows the people. Subscribe if you want more of the real story behind the music.